Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today my review of Stephen King's latest, Never Flinch. So this is Stephen King's latest novel. It came out today, 27th of May. I bought it for my Kobo at 6 a.m. this morning. I've been reading it all day. I finished it just after lunch. So that should tell you that if nothing else, it's an unputdownable book. It's very fast paced. It's very enjoyable. It's really, really gripping and I had a great time with it. Appropriately enough for lunch, I had a burger because this is a very American book. It really is a book that feels like it's about America and is kind of steeped in American culture, as you would probably expect from Stephen King. So in this review, I'll tell you what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, because it's by no means perfect. And I'll also tell you what I thought was interesting about the book. So this is the new book about King's character, Holly Gibney. And this is, I think, the first time King has really kind of let himself sink into writing a series. So clearly the Dark Tower books were a series, but they were a series that had a continuing story. Whereas the Holly Gibney books are separate stories. So we started out with the Bill Hodges trilogy of 3 books, which introduced Holly as a character. So those 3 books did work together as a trilogy. But then Holly also appeared in a novella in the collection If It Bleeds, and in a standalone novel, Holly, and then in this new novel, Never Flinch. So King is a long-time fan of this kind of fiction. You often see him reference it in his novels. He has characters reading books that are part of long-running mystery series, and I think it would be wonderful if he does manage to make this into a long-running series. It's really interesting to see him doing this kind of thing. Clearly, you know, his reputation is as a horror writer, but he loves mystery fiction, he loves thriller fiction, and he does a really good job of it. Some of the Holly Gibney books do have supernatural elements to them. And Holly, whilst it didn't really have supernatural parts, definitely felt like a horror novel at times. It was really, really horrific. Whereas Never Flinch feels more like a pure mystery thriller kind of a book. And it's very, very enjoyable. So the book has 2 plot lines running through it. The first of those is about a series of murders apparently being committed to avenge somebody who was sent to prison for a crime they didn't commit. The second one is about a feminist activist who's on a tour around the country and who's being targeted by anti-abortion protesters. And clearly Holly Gibney, the detective who's central to this book, ends up getting involved in both of those plot lines. Holly's a really fun character. I really enjoy reading her. She's someone who's on the autistic spectrum, and that's something that's kind of referenced quite explicitly in previous books in the series. But by now, King expects us to just kind of know Holly as a character, to understand her quirks, and she's really very enjoyable to read. One of those quirks is her fear of COVID. So people, I think, criticised, or some people certainly criticised Holly for its references to COVID. In this book, those references are far less, but Holly is still scarred by COVID and still masks up when she goes out. But that is very much presented as part of her own personal neuroses rather than something that people necessarily should be doing. Aside from Holly, the book has a fantastic cast of supporting characters, many of whom are returning from previous books in the series. They're really, really enjoyable to read, and King inserts lots of little subplots about those characters which are very satisfying. They don't necessarily have anything to do with the main plots of the book, but they are fun to read. And all of those plot lines come together really well towards the end of the book, so you really care about these characters by that point. So when things get tense, they get really, really tense, and the final 20% or so is truly, truly gripping. Now, moving on to what I didn't like so much about the book. So the first thing is there's definitely a bit of an over-reliance on coincidence and also people overlooking obvious clues. There are a few things that just I felt stretched credibility a little bit. There's also one trope that King uses in this book which felt to me at best dated and at worst a little bit offensive. It definitely didn't feel like something you'd expect to see in the book from the 2020s. It felt more like something from a book from the 1970s or 1980s. But overall, it's a very enjoyable thriller. And that brings me to what's interesting about the book. So King has in recent years been criticised for letting his own personal politics come too much to the fore in his books. Certainly some readers, and I've had this a lot in the comments on my Stephen King videos, some readers seem very turned off by this. And I think he's turned it down a notch in this one. So he's definitely comes down on one side or the other of the anti-abortion debate, and you can probably guess which side he comes down on. But there are far less references to Donald Trump in this book than there have been in some of the previous books in the Gibney series. I think I counted 3, although you do get a reference to JD Vance and a reference to Elon Musk. But all of those are kind of just asides. He doesn't really kind of dig into criticising those people too much. What I think this book is really about, though, is kind of about the fractured state of America. The fact that there seem to be 2 competing tribes increasingly in America and in other countries as well, it's fair to say, who are constantly at war with each other. And that comes through again and again in the plot lines in this book, and also in some of the characters in this book. A lot of the characters definitely feel like they have 2 sides to them. So that kind of duality is something that he talks about a lot in the book. All through the book, you get examples of people who are doing the things that they feel to be right, but will go to extreme lengths to get what they want. So this is really a book about people who think the ends justify the means, and it questions whether they do or not. That title, Never Flinch, I think is a very deliberate reference to that. It's a phrase that one of the characters, one of the villainous characters in the book, uses again and again to justify his actions. So whilst I think King definitely does still have political views, I think this is a book whose message is more that people need to put aside their differences and try and find some common ground. So those are my thoughts on Never Flinch by Stephen King. It definitely has some flaws. It's definitely not his best book, but it feels like at this point in his career, he's just settled into writing what he enjoys. And I think we can probably all agree that at this point, he's earned that right. Anyway, do let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.